In 1941, the FDA approved a chemical for use in commercial bread. In 1992, the FDA tested that same chemical in dozens of commercial products and found unsafe levels. They tested again in 1998. One sample came back at nearly 1,000 times the detection limit. The FDA took no enforcement action either time. The chemical is still legal in 48 American states today. It is called potassium bromate. The United Kingdom banned it in 1990. The European Union banned it in 1990. Canada banned it in 1994. China banned it in 2005. India banned it in 2016. The United Nations Food Safety Body removed it from the global approved additives list in 2012. The FDA's formal review began in March 2024. It has no announced completion date. That gap between what the science established and what the regulation did was filled by an industry now valued at $5.3 billion a year. The dough conditioners market exists because potassium bromate needed replacing. It replaced it with chemistry that began accumulating its own problems within a decade. By the time this is over, you will know the two phrases on any bread label that tell you whether this chemical is in your loaf. You will know why the law that should have banned it cannot touch it, and you will understand exactly how a 17-year gap in the regulatory timeline became the most profitable accident in the history of commercial baking. The answer starts in 1941. But the story starts much earlier, with what bread was before the chemistry arrived and what the chemistry actually does once it is inside the dough. Potassium bromate is an oxidizing agent. When flour is milled, the gluten proteins inside it are structurally weak. Their molecular bonds are incomplete. Traditionally, bakers aged their flour for weeks after milling, exposing it to open air so oxygen could slowly build those bonds. The process took time. Potassium bromate collapsed weeks into hours. Here is the specific mechanism. Potassium bromate attacks sulfhydryl groups, the chemical handshakes between gluten proteins, and forces them into disulfide bridges. Those bridges create a tighter, more elastic gluten matrix. The dough traps gas bubbles more efficiently as it rises. The bread emerges taller, more uniform, with a finer crumb structure that consumers had been conditioned to associate with quality. What made potassium bromate irreplaceable to industrial bakers, and what made replacing it genuinely difficult, is its timing. It is a slow-acting oxidizer. It does not release its effect during mixing. It works through fermentation, through proofing, through the early stages of baking, sustained across the entire process. Every alternative the industry subsequently developed releases its effect during mixing and proofing. By the time the dough enters the oven, those alternatives have already exhausted themselves. The gluten matrix receives no further reinforcement during the stages where it is most mechanically stressed. The technical baking literature is direct about this. Ascorbic acid, azotic carbonamide, calcium peroxide, potassium iodate, all fast-acting. None of them replicate the sustained action of potassium bromate across the full arc of bread making. The industry knew this distinction when they made the switch. They made it anyway, and then described the substitutes as equivalent. In Japan, commercial bakeries voluntarily stopped using potassium bromate in 1980. One major producer, Yamazaki Baking, quietly resumed its use in 2005, citing new production methods. The science had not changed. The market pressure had. In 1982, Kurokawa and colleagues at Japan's National Cancer Research Institute published the first long-term carcinogenicity study on potassium bromate. The findings were unambiguous. Potassium bromate induced renal cell tumors in rats with dose-dependent consistency across 104 weeks of administration. A follow-up study in 1986, published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute, confirmed the findings across 148 rats. A comprehensive 1990 review in Environmental Health Perspectives concluded that potassium bromate was a complete carcinogen, possessing both initiating and promoting activity for kidney tumor development. The European Community banned it in 1990. The United Kingdom banned it the same year. In 1991, the FDA issued its response. Not a ban. A voluntary guidance, no legal force, no compliance mechanism, no enforcement pathway, urging bakers to stop using it if they found it convenient to do so. That same year, the dough conditioners industry began its expansion. In 1992, the joint FAO and WHO Expert Committee on Food Additives, the scientific body that advises the United Nations on food safety, declared that the use of potassium bromate as a flour treatment agent was not appropriate and withdrew the previous approved use limit of 60 parts per million. In 1995, that body reiterated the conclusion because new data showed bromate residue persisted in finished bread even when used at supposedly acceptable levels. The FDA conducted its own tests on commercial products in 1992 and 1993. Many contained potassium bromate at levels the agency itself considered unsafe. The FDA took no enforcement action. In 1998 and 1999, the FDA tested again. The results were the same. One sample registered at nearly 1,000 times the detection limit. The FDA took no enforcement action. In 1999, the Center for Science in the Public Interest filed a formal petition with the FDA demanding a ban. The dough conditioners market, the industry supplying the alternatives, was growing. Canada had banned potassium bromate in 1994. Brazil had banned it. Nigeria, Peru, Sri Lanka would ban it in 2001. China in 2005. India in 2016. The FDA has never definitively responded to the 1999 petition. In 2012, the Codex Alimentarius Commission, the food standards body of the United Nations, formally removed potassium bromate from its list of approved food additives in line with the scientific conclusions the FAO and WHO Expert Committee had reached 2 decades earlier. The FDA's formal review began in March 2024. No timeline for completion has been announced. What does an agency do when its own tests confirm unsafe residue levels in 1992, confirm them again in 1998, receive a formal petition for a ban in 1999, watch the United Nations remove the substance from the global approved list in 2012, and still have no completion date for its review in 2026? The primary industrial replacement for potassium bromate beginning in the early 1990s was azotocarbonamide. Azotocarbonamide is banned in the European Union. It is banned in Australia. In February 2026, the American Bakers Association announced that the commercial baking industry is nearing completion of a voluntary phase-out of azotocarbonamide from baked goods across the United States. The substitute for the banned substance required its own voluntary phase-out 30 years later. The remaining replacements, ascorbic acid, calcium peroxide, enzyme systems built from amylase and xylanase and lipase, carry no carcinogenicity classifications. They are also structurally insufficient on their own. Commercial bakeries now combine multiple agents: ascorbic acid for early oxidation during mixing, enzyme systems for mid-stage structural support, emulsifiers for crumb consistency. The result is a longer ingredient list, a more complex additive profile, and a loaf that approaches, but does not fully replicate, what a single slow-acting chemical achieved across the full baking process. In 1990, a standard commercial white bread formula contained roughly 6 core ingredients. A typical commercial white bread label today contains between 15 and 23 ingredients. No law required that expansion. No public body approved it. The formulation changed because the oxidation system changed, and each substitution created new functional gaps that required additional chemistry to fill. Now look at your bread label. Potassium bromate appears as potassium bromate or as bromated flour. If you see either phrase, the chemical is present. In California, that product cannot legally be sold after January 1st, 2027. In the other 48 states, it remains fully legal with no warning requirement. The consumer standing in the bread aisle in those 48 states has no mechanism, other than reading the label, to know what oxidation system their bread was built on. That is not a gap in the system. That is the system. You are standing in a kitchen. The light is coming sideways through the window. On the counter is a bag of flour. The label says unbromated. You now know what that word cost someone to put there and what it means that most bags do not have it. You open it. The smell is clean, grain before it becomes something else, before the chemistry starts. You measure the water, room temperature, because what happens next does not need heat from you. The fermentation is biological, not chemical. The organisms doing the work have been doing this for longer than the regulatory framework that decided to replace them. You combine flour and water. You wait, not because the process is difficult, it is not, but because time is the one input that cannot be patented, cannot be synthesized, and does not appear on any ingredient label. Hours pass. The dough has changed. It smells of fermentation, complex, slightly sour, alive in a way that a product built on azotocarbonamide and enzyme systems is not. You shape it. You score the surface. You put it in the oven, and the kitchen fills with something that predates the 1914 patent, the 1941 FDA approval, the 1991 voluntary guidance, and every market report that followed. You pull it out. The crust is dark where it opened. You let it rest because you know the interior is still setting, steam redistributing, structure solidifying, the process completing itself on its own schedule. You cut it. The crumb is open and irregular. You eat a piece standing at the counter. You did not purchase an additive system. You did not consume a dough conditioner. You fed yourself with 4 ingredients and time. The American Bakers Association, representing more than 350 member companies operating more than 1,200 commercial baking facilities, announced in January 2026 that member companies will voluntarily phase out potassium bromate by December 31, 2026. The announcement noted that the overwhelming majority of member companies already do not use it, which means some still do. Today, legally. In the 48 states outside California, any miller, any bakery, any commercial food manufacturer may add potassium bromate to flour sold to consumers right now. No warning required. No disclosure mandated beyond the ingredient list. The substance appears under 2 names: potassium bromate and bromated flour. Those are the only phrases you need. If either appears on your label, put the product back. That is the complete action. No petition required. No regulatory intervention needed. The market response works faster than the regulatory one, and the evidence already proves it. Cairn Spring Mills, operating out of Burlington, Washington, produces unbromated flour at commercial scale, millions of pounds annually, under standard federal milling regulations that have always permitted bromate-free production. Pepperidge Farm reformulated, Arnold reformulated, Oroheat reformulated. Best Foods, maker of those brands, removed potassium bromate not because a federal ban required it, but because California required label disclosure, and reformulating for California meant reformulating for every market served from the same facility. The California Food Safety Act, Assembly Bill 418, signed October 7, 2023, effective January 1, 2027, bans potassium bromate from any food manufactured, sold, or distributed in California. Violations carry civil penalties of up to $5,000 for a first offense. Utah has banned it from school meals. New York has introduced legislation to follow. The federal ban has not come. The state-level movement has forced the reformulation the federal system declined to require. The consumer reading the label in the bread aisle is the mechanism that made it happen. That mechanism is available to you right now, in any state, on any shopping trip. The label is the vote. It counts every time you cast it. A chemical that the FDA's own tests found at unsafe levels in 1992, found again in 1998, that received a formal ban petition in 1999, that the United Nations removed from its approved list in 2012, remains legal across most of the United States in 2026 because it was approved in 1941, 17 years before the law that would have stopped it existed. The system did not overlook potassium bromate. It was built in a way that made overlooking it the only available option. 10 years from now, the people who never read the label will still be eating whatever the formulation contains. You will be standing in that bread aisle, reading 2 phrases, choosing the loaf that does not carry them, and feeding your family with the information, a regulatory gap assumed, you would never seek. If this opens something for you, if you can see yourself reading that label, making that choice every week, subscribe so you do not miss the next system we uncover. The pattern repeats across more of your food supply than this one ingredient. Share this with someone who eats bread every day and has never seen those 2 words on the label.